In the early hours of a November morning in 1943, Petty Officer Hiroshi Tanabe found himself in 31-degree water in the Solomon Sea, the burning wreckage of the destroyer Shirakumo scattered around him, with no clear sense of which direction was the surface. A single torpedo had done what 51 minutes earlier had seemed impossible. It had sent 2,090 tons of steel, turbine, and torpedo to the bottom of the Pacific, faster than the men inside it could react. For the next 51 minutes, Tanabe would float in the darkness, counting the voices of his crewmates, and then counting the silences that replaced them, arriving at a number the Imperial Japanese Naval Ministry would never publish, and that he would carry for the rest of his life. What had brought him to that water, and what his life had looked like in the weeks before that torpedo hit, is a story the Imperial Navy's institutional narrative was not designed to tell. This is an attempt to tell it anyway. The Fubuki-Class, 24 destroyers commissioned between 1928 and 1933, and at the time of their introduction, the most advanced destroyer design in the world. When the first of them entered service, foreign naval observers refused to believe the published specifications were genuine. 6 127mm guns in 3 twin turrets, 9 torpedo tubes carrying the Type 93 Long Lance, an oxygen-propelled weapon with a range and speed that no contemporary torpedo could match, a designed maximum speed of 38 knots. Ships so capable that the navies which would eventually fight them spent years underestimating them, because the underestimation was more comfortable than the alternative. By 1942, those same ships were 14 years old. Their boiler brickwork was cracked. Their hull frames had accumulated the stress cycles that come from operating a warship at combat intensity across years of deployment. The men who served on them were no longer serving on the most advanced destroyers in the world. They were serving on aging steel hulls in tropical waters the designers had never accounted for. At an operational tempo the men who drew the blueprints had never imagined and would not have sanctioned. That distinction mattered in ways that were immediate, physical, and daily. Before any engagement, before any torpedo, before any night run down the slot, the forward berthing space on a Fubuki-class destroyer housed between 40 and 50 men in a compartment roughly the dimensions of a modest apartment. The Imperial Japanese Navy had placed its junior enlisted men in the bow, the area most directly exposed to the hydrodynamic violence of a ship moving at speed through a cross sea. The officers slept further aft. The Navy's social hierarchy was encoded with considerable precision in the geometry of where men were permitted to lose consciousness. In the Solomon Sea, in the wet season, a Fubuki running at 30 knots produced a motion in its bow that defies easy description. The bow would rise, slowly, with the deceptive gentleness of a very large force applied to a very large object, and then come down. Not onto the next wave, into the back face of it. That impact transmitted directly through the hull frames, through the deck plates, through the bunks, and into the bodies of the men attempting to sleep. Those men slept in hammocks. In moderate weather, the system worked. In the Solomon's wet season, the hammocks amplified the ship's motion, swinging the men through arcs that made genuine rest functionally impossible. After enough weeks of it, the body's definition of rest adjusts to what it is actually receiving. The men adjusted. They had no other option. The watch system meant the compartment was never fully occupied and never fully quiet. There was no hour in which it was possible, in any meaningful sense, to be alone. Western navies in similar conditions developed a forced familiarity. Dark humor, personal disclosure, the intimacy that shared misery produces when men decide to acknowledge it, rather than pretend otherwise. The Japanese destroyer's culture moved in the opposite direction. Controlled restraint, the formality of the rank structure extending into informal spaces, maintaining distance between men sleeping within arm's reach of each other every night. It was the successful operation of a system that had decided what a destroyer sailor should be, and produced exactly that. The boiler rooms on a Fubuki, operating at full combat power in the Solomon Sea, registered temperatures between 50 and 60 degrees Celsius. Heat exhaustion in an unacclimated man develops within 40 minutes. Acclimatized men did not collapse. They developed instead a sustained reduction in cognitive function and physical capacity that accumulated gradually over weeks in a way that was not dramatic, not sudden, and therefore easy to overlook if you had operational requirements that made overlooking it convenient. The men documented it in diaries that regulations technically prohibited and officers generally chose not to enforce. The entries are not poetic. They record heat, inadequate water, and food declining in quality as the American submarine campaign slowly strangled the logistics network. By late 1943, the rice was older. The dried fish portions were smaller. The miso was thinner. Fresh water followed the same priority hierarchy that governed everything. Engineering first, drinking water second, food preparation third, personal hygiene last. Not merely reduced, but available only when circumstances permitted. Men bathed with damp cloths. The smell of the forward berthing space on the 14th day of a patrol was a fact of life that the men living in it had stopped registering entirely, and that anyone arriving from shore immediately and emphatically noticed. This was the baseline, the daily condition before the engagements began, before the nights when the question stopped being about discomfort and started being about whether the ship would still exist in 2 hours. The channel between the central Solomon Islands ran approximately 300 miles from the anchorage at Shortland in the north down to Guadalcanal in the south. The Imperial Japanese Navy called the supply runs the Tokyo Express. The Americans called the channel the Slot. Both names described the same reality. Japanese destroyers running at 30 knots in total darkness against an enemy getting progressively better at stopping them. American submarines operated below. PT boats worked the shallower coastal waters, small, fast, and difficult to detect until uncomfortably close. And from late 1942 onward, American destroyers equipped with radar could locate a Japanese formation in complete darkness with a precision that no amount of optical training could compensate for. Against radar-guided fire in total darkness, even the finest lookouts in the world could not resolve the problem of being shot at by an enemy you could not see. The men navigating those runs were doing so after weeks of 3 to 4 hours of sleep per 24-hour period. Documented not in memoir, but in the operational logs of the destroyer squadrons and in the reports of fleet medical officers. 3 to 4 hours per day, for men standing watch in 50-degree boiler rooms, running at 30 knots through water containing reefs, shoals, submarines, and an increasingly capable surface enemy, in total darkness for months. They did it because the mission required it, and because nothing in their framework permitted them to consider otherwise. On the night of November 30th, 1942, Rear Admiral Raizo Tanaka's force of 8 destroyers was intercepted by an American cruiser and destroyer force under Rear Admiral Carlton Wright. The Americans had radar. The Japanese did not. Wright's cruisers opened fire at approximately 11:10 in the evening, hitting the destroyer Takanami and stopping her dead in the slot, burning. What followed is why historians still study Tassafaronga more than 80 years later. Tanaka's remaining crews, under fire, in total darkness, their formation disrupted, launched torpedo attacks that struck 4 American heavy cruisers. Northampton sank. Minneapolis, New Orleans, and Pensacola were damaged so severely that all three required months of repair. Tanaka lost one destroyer. The men who fired those torpedoes were in their third week of sustained operations, sleeping 3 hours a night. They hit 4 maneuvering targets in total darkness, without radar, under fire. It was the disciplined execution of exhausted men doing what training had made automatic when everything else was gone. It was also the high water mark. Those men were dying in the slot at a rate the training pipeline could not replace. The force was consuming itself in the act of demonstrating what it could do. Of the approximately 282 destroyers the Imperial Navy commissioned between 1922 and 1945, 227 were sunk before the war ended, a destruction rate of 80%. No surface combatant in any navy in any war suffered losses at that rate. The men were not told this number. What they knew, they learned from the ships that left and did not return, and from replacement ratings sleeping in bunks belonging to men whose names they still knew. Seaman First Class Kiyosuke Yamamoto was 19 when he joined the Hatsuyuki in the spring of 1944. She was sunk by American submarine torpedo that October. Of her 208 crew, 43 were rescued. Yamamoto was not among them. He had been in destroyer service for 8 months. His last letter home said the food was adequate and his mother should not worry. His brother read it for the first time in 1961, when he was old enough for it to mean what it actually meant. He said his brother had known there were other things he could have written and had chosen not to, so their mother would not worry. He thought about that choice for the rest of his life. If you found this story interesting, don't forget to like and subscribe. It really helps the channel.